A young virgin agrees to spend a night with an older man. He, a millionaire trying to redeem himself for a past he never told anyone about. If this story caught your interest, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. The rain tapped against the windows of the apartment in Williamsburg like impatient fingers, and Olivia watched the droplets slide down the glass while pretending to pay attention to her online Brazilian literature class. At 19, she had mastered the art of being physically present while her mind wandered through forbidden territories. It had always been this way. The girl who smiled at the right moments, who answered when asked, but who lived in a kind of translucent bubble that separated her from the real world. The apartment she shared with two college roommates from NYU was small but cozy, yet Olivia felt strange there. In fact, she had felt strange everywhere since leaving her parents' home in upstate New York. It wasn't exactly homesickness. It was more as if she had left a part of herself buried in that house, where time had stopped 20 years ago on the day Sarah died. Her sister, the perfect sister, the dead sister, the sister no one talked about, but who was present in every corner of the house, in every sigh from her mother, in every empty look from her father. Sarah had been everything Olivia would never be: spontaneous, passionate, free. She was only 2 years older than Olivia is now when she decided to leave this world, leaving behind a hole in the shape of a young woman that the family never managed to fill. Olivia, could you comment on the female representation in Dom Casmurro? The professor's voice brought her back to the virtual reality of the class. She murmured an automatic response about Capitu while her fingers nervously played with the pendant she wore around her neck. It had been Sarah's, the only thing of her sister's she had managed to take when she came to New York, hidden at the bottom of her suitcase like a guilty secret. When the class ended, Olivia closed her laptop and walked to the window. New York stretched out before her like a sea of concrete and possibilities. She had come here with the silent promise to reinvent herself, to be more than the shadow of her dead sister, more than the surviving daughter who carried the weight of expectations and inexplicable guilt. But after 2 semesters at the university, she still felt like a spectator of her own life. Her parents called religiously every Sunday, always with the same conversation full of excessive care and questions about her studies, her friends, her health. They never asked about dating or fun, as if love were territory too dangerous for Olivia to step into, as if she were too fragile to withstand the intensities that life offered, and perhaps she was. At 19, she had never had a serious boyfriend, had never lost herself in a passion, had never felt her heart race for someone in a way that frightened her. It was as if she lived in a glass dome, protected from everything. That could hurt her, but also deprived of everything that could make her feel truly alive. Her beauty was soft, almost ethereal, but there was an untouchable quality about her that kept people at a safe distance. Her college classmates respected her, some even flirted timidly, but there was something about Olivia that discouraged more intimate approaches. That afternoon, as she walked across the NYU campus toward the library, Olivia carried in her chest a restlessness that had been growing for weeks. It was as if something inside her was awakening, a hunger she couldn't name, a desire to break her own shell and discover who she really was beneath all that protection. Perhaps it was the proximity of turning 20, or perhaps it was simply the weariness of living as a dimmed version of herself. She remembered the words her mother repeated like a mantra. "You're special, Olivia. You need to preserve yourself for someone who deserves your purity, purity." The word echoed in her mind like a burden. She wanted to be pure, but she also wanted to be real. She wanted to be protected, but she also wanted to be touched. She wanted to honor her sister's memory, but she also wanted to live her own story. When she arrived at the library, her eyes were drawn to a poster at the entrance. Charity event, cultural night for education. It would be next Saturday at a Navi art gallery in Soho. Academics, business people, and philanthropists would gather to discuss social projects and raise funds for scholarships. It wasn't the type of event Olivia usually attended, but something in the description intrigued her. Perhaps it was the idea of being in a different environment, surrounded by people who didn't know her story, where she could experiment with being someone different for a night. She noted the address on her phone with a determination that surprised her. For some reason she couldn't explain, she knew she needed to be there. It was as if an inner voice whispered that something important awaited her at that event, something that would change the course of her story forever. That night, when she returned to the apartment, Olivia went to the closet and took out a dress she had bought months ago, but never had the courage to wear. It was black, elegant, more daring than her comfort zone allowed. When she tried it on in front of the mirror, she almost didn't recognize herself. The fragile girl had given way to a young woman who radiated a mysterious and melancholic beauty. For a moment, she saw Sarah reflected there, and her heart raced. She sat on the bed, holding the pendant between her fingers. "Sarah," she whispered to the empty room, "help me understand what I'm looking for." But silence was her only answer, as always. Her parents had told her only the essentials about her sister's death, an accident, a fatality, something about which it was better not to speak, to avoid reopening wounds. But Olivia had always known there was more to the story. In the prolonged silences, in the looks exchanged between her parents, in the drawers that always remained locked. What bothered her most was the persistent feeling that she had been present on the night Sarah died. She couldn't access this memory clearly, but sometimes, in fragmented dreams, she saw confused images. Rain, a dark road, the sound of tires singing on the asphalt, and Sarah's voice, whispering something urgent in her ear. She always woke up before she could understand the words. She put the dress away again and prepared for another night of insomnia. She knew that Saturday would be a watershed. She felt it in her bones, with the same intensity with which she sometimes sensed rain before the clouds formed in the sky. Saturday arrived with a New York shrouded in fog, as if the entire city were holding its breath. Olivia spent most of the day regretting her decision to go to the event, changing her mind every hour. When the sun began to set, however, something inside her definitely decided. She put on the black dress, applied makeup more carefully than usual, and took a taxi to Soho. The gallery was in a modern glass and steel building, and when Olivia got out of the car, she was immediately enveloped by the sophisticated atmosphere of the place. Men in dark suits conversed in small groups. Elegant women circulated among the works of art with glasses of wine in hand, and a pianist played soft jazz in a corner of the main hall. It was a world completely different from what she knew, but strangely she didn't feel out of place. She took a glass of red wine and began to circulate among the exhibited works. They were mainly contemporary paintings and sculptures, many portraying the modern urban condition. There was something melancholic about the art on display, a sense of isolation and searching that resonated with her own feelings. She stopped, in front of a large canvas where a female figure with her back turned looked at a nocturnal city through a window. The woman seemed to be waiting for something or someone, and Olivia saw herself reflected in that posture of silent expectation. Interesting choice. The voice came from behind her, deep and velvety, with a tone that suggested years of experience in observing people and situations. Olivia turned and felt the air leave her lungs. The man who was a few meters from her was different from anyone she had ever met. Tall, with dark hair slightly graying at the temples, wearing an impeccable black suit that seemed to have been tailored specifically for his body. But it was his gaze that completely unsettled her. His eyes were dark, almost black, and there was an intensity in them that seemed to see through people, as if they were capable of deciphering secrets that not even she knew about herself. He wasn't just attractive in the conventional sense, although he was undeniably handsome. There was something magnetic about his presence, a predatory quality that both attracted and alerted her. "Victor Sullivan," he introduced himself, extending his hand. When Olivia touched his fingers, she felt an electric current run up her arm. It was as if they had known each other for a very long time, as if this encounter were a long-awaited reunion. "Olivia," she responded, surprised by her own voice, which came out hoarser than usual. "Do you know the artist?" He smiled, and it was an enigmatic smile that revealed nothing except that there were stories behind those eyes. "I know many artists, and you? Do you study art?" "Literature, at NYU." She felt strangely compelled to tell him the truth, as if lying would be impossible in the face of that penetrating gaze. Literature, he repeated, as if he were savoring the word. Stories, narratives about the human condition. He took a step closer, and Olivia could smell his cologne, a mixture of woody and spicy notes that invaded her senses. "And what kind of stories interest you, Olivia?" The question seemed simple, but there were layers to it that Olivia couldn't completely decipher. "Stories about people who lose themselves to find themselves," she replied, again surprising herself with her own honesty. Victor tilted his head slightly, studying her with an attention that made her heart race. "Interesting. And have you ever lost yourself?" The question hit a raw nerve. Olivia felt her face heat up, but she couldn't look away. "I think I'm still trying to find myself. At 19 you have time." He knew her age without her having mentioned it, but this didn't surprise her as much as it should have. There was something about Victor that suggested he knew many things without needing to ask. They walked together through the hall, talking about art, literature, and philosophy. Victor was erudite without being pedantic, provocative without being arrogant. He asked questions that forced her to think beyond her automatic answers, as if he were mapping her personality through her words. Olivia discovered that she liked being intellectually challenged, liked the feeling that her mind was being stimulated in a different way. During the conversation, she learned that he was an investor, that he financed cultural and educational projects, that he preferred to remain behind the scenes instead of seeking the spotlight. He had no social media, rarely gave interviews, but his influence extended across various sectors of New York's economy and culture. He was a man who had built an empire in discretion, someone whose power resided exactly in his ability to remain invisible when necessary. "And you?" he asked when they approached the piano where the musician was taking a break. "Do you plan to become a teacher, a writer?" "I don't know yet," Olivia admitted. "Sometimes I feel like I'm studying literature to better understand the words that were never spoken in my home." Victor stopped walking and looked at her directly. For a moment, something passed through his eyes, a shadow she couldn't interpret. "Unspoken words can be more powerful than those pronounced," he said, and his voice had a different quality now, deeper, more charged. The pianist began to play again, a melancholic melody that Olivia vaguely recognized but couldn't name. Victor moved closer to her, and the world seemed to reduce to the space between the two of them. "Olivia," he said her name as if it were a prayer, "may I ask you a direct question?" She nodded, unable to speak. "Did you come here tonight looking for something specific?" The honesty of the question destabilized her. "I came looking to feel alive," she whispered. Victor smiled again, but this time there was something different about the smile, something that made Olivia's stomach flip with anticipation and fear. "Then, perhaps I can help with that," he said, and for the first time she felt that she was about to cross a line from which there would be no return. Victor's words hung in the air between them like a dangerous promise. Olivia felt her pulse quicken, not just from his physical proximity, but from the implication of what he had just suggested. For the first time in her life, she was facing a situation where she couldn't predict the next move, where she had no control over what might happen. "How?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The noise of the gallery, the conversations, around them the piano music, everything seemed to have transformed into a distant murmur. Victor moved even closer, and Olivia could feel the heat radiating from his body. He didn't touch her, but his presence was so intense that she felt enveloped. "Nonetheless, come with me," he said, just like that, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Where?" she asked, although deep down she knew the question didn't matter. The destination wasn't what scared and excited her at the same time, but the journey, the path to a completely unknown territory of herself. "To a place where you can discover who you really are when no one is watching," he answered, and there was something hypnotic about the way he pronounced the words, as if they were an enchantment. Olivia looked around the gallery. She saw the elegant people, the works of art, the sophisticated social life that continued its normal course while she was about to do something that would change everything. It was as if she were watching her own life from the outside, seeing the protected girl she had always been about to make a decision that would take her far away from that version of herself forever. "I don't do things like this," she said, more to herself than to him. "I know," Victor replied. "That's exactly why you should." There was a perverse logic to it that hit her like a punch to the stomach. Throughout her life, she had done exactly what was expected of her, had been the perfect daughter, the exemplary student, the pure young woman who carried the family's hopes for redemption. And where had it led her? To a place of emotional isolation, to a life without color, without intensity, without truth. "One night," Victor said, as if he had read her thoughts. "Just one. No consequences, no commitments. Just you discovering what happens when you stop protecting yourself from yourself." The proposal was both liberating and terrifying. Olivia felt like she was standing at the edge of a precipice, and that the next step would be a dive into the unknown. But for the first time in her life, the unknown didn't frighten her as much as the prospect of continuing to live in the suffocating safety she had built around herself. "What if I can't stop?" she asked, and the question came out laden with a vulnerability that surprised her. Victor smiled, and this time his smile had an almost tender quality. "Then you don't stop, simple as that." He paused, studying her face. "But I promise you one thing, Olivia, I only stop if you tell me to." The words resonated within her like an echo. There was something in the way he said it, a solemnity that transformed the phrase into almost an oath, as if he were giving her a power she had never had before, the power to decide her own limits, to explore how far she wanted to go. Olivia closed her eyes for a moment, trying to find an anchor amidst the whirlwind of sensations stirring inside. She thought of her parents, of the silent house where she grew up, of the Sundays after Mass when she would sit in her room and wonder if her life would always be like this, predictable and safe and empty. She thought of Sarah, of the sister who had lived with intensity and passion, who had allowed herself to feel everything, even if it had destroyed her in the end. When she opened her eyes, Victor was observing every micro-expression on her face, as if he were mapping the transformation process happening inside her. There was no rush in his eyes, no pressure, just patience and a silent certainty that she would arrive at the answer she needed to reach. "Yes," she said, and the word left her mouth before she could regret it. "Yes, I want to." Victor nodded, as if he had expected that answer all along. He extended his hand to her, and when Olivia took it, she felt as if she was signing a contract whose terms she didn't completely know, but which she was willing to honor anyway. They walked together toward the exit of the gallery, and Olivia felt the gazes of some people following them, but for the first time in her life, she didn't care what others might think. She was too busy trying to process the magnitude of what she was about to do, and the strange sensation of relief that accompanied her. In the elevator, as they descended in silence, Victor asked, "Are you afraid?" "Terrified," she admitted. "Good," he said. "Fear means you're alive." When they reached the ground floor, a dark car was waiting for them. Victor opened the door for her, and Olivia got into the soft leather seat, feeling as if she were entering a dream from which she didn't know if she wanted to wake up. As the car traversed the illuminated streets of New York, she looked out the window and saw the city she knew transform into something completely different, more mysterious, more full of possibilities. "Where are we going?" she finally asked. "To my home," Victor replied. "To a place where you can be anyone you want to be, without judgment, without fear, without regret." Olivia nodded and leaned back in the seat, closing her eyes and allowing herself for the first time in 19 years to completely trust the unknown. She knew that when the sun rose again, she would be a different person from who she was at that moment. And for the first time in her life, that didn't frighten her. In fact, she could hardly wait to discover who she would be. The elevator rose in silence through the floors of an elegant building in the Upper East Side, and Olivia felt her anxiety grow with each number that flashed on the panel. It wasn't exactly fear, but an anticipation that made her stomach turn and her skin tingle. Beside her, Victor remained serene, as if bringing an unknown young woman up to his apartment were routine. But there was something in the way he discreetly observed her through the reflection of the elevator doors that suggested this night was different for him too. When the doors opened directly into the entrance hall of the apartment, Olivia was immediately enveloped by an atmosphere that seemed to have come out of a film. The space was large and minimalist, decorated in tones of black, grey and white, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a spectacular view of the illuminated city. But what most caught her attention was the silence that inhabited that place, a silence different from what she knew at home. It wasn't the heavy silence of mourning, but the elegant silence of someone who had chosen solitude as a way of life. "Wine?" Victor asked, heading to a well-stocked bar in the corner of the room. "Please," Olivia replied, though her voice came out weaker than she intended. She walked to the windows, admiring the view, but mainly trying to process where she was and what she was doing. The city stretched out at her feet like a sea of lights, and she felt simultaneously powerful and vulnerable at that height. Victor approached from behind, offering her a glass of red wine. When their fingers touched again, Olivia felt the same electric current as in the gallery, only now amplified by the intimacy of the environment. "It's beautiful," she said, referring to the view. "Yes," he agreed, but when she turned, she realized he wasn't looking at the city, but at her. The air between them became charged with a tension that Olivia had never experienced before. It was as if there were a parallel conversation happening beneath the words, a language made of looks, breaths, and physical proximity. She took a sip of the wine, trying to calm her nerves, but the alcohol only intensified the sensation of floating outside reality. "Can you tell me something about yourself?" she asked, desperate to break the silence that threatened to consume her. Victor smiled, an enigmatic smile that was already becoming familiar. "What would you like to know?" "Anything." "Everything. You're a complete mystery." "Mysteries are more interesting when they remain unexplained," he said, walking toward a corner of the room where there was a black grand piano. Olivia followed him, intrigued. The piano was closed, and on it were a few carefully arranged objects. An old score, a few black and white photographs turned face down, and a dried flower inside a small crystal vase. Something about that flower made Olivia's heart race, though she couldn't identify exactly what disturbed her. "Do you play?" she asked. "I used to," Victor replied, but there was a melancholy in his voice that wasn't there before. "Now I prefer to listen." He went to a vintage sound system, and in a few seconds the room was filled with the sound of instrumental jazz. The music was melancholic and sensual, the kind of soundtrack that transformed ordinary moments into something cinematic. Olivia approached the piano, and her attention was again drawn to the dried flower. It was delicate, with petals that were once red but now had the color of time. Something about it seemed familiar, as if she had seen it before, but in another place, another context. "Is it special?" she asked, indicating the flower. Victor approached, standing behind her, so close that she could feel his warm breath on her neck. "All flowers are special when they represent an important memory." "What kind of memory?" "The kind you never managed to forget even when you should." The cryptic response made Olivia turn to face him. He was so close that she could see small lines around his eyes, details that spoke of experiences and stories she could only imagine. There was a timeless quality about him, as if he had lived much more than his apparent age suggested. "Victor," she said his name like a question. "Yes?" "Why did you bring me here?" "Really?" He studied her face for a long moment, as if deciding how much truth he could share. "Because when I saw you in the gallery, I recognized something in you, something I thought I had lost forever." "What?" "The ability to surprise myself." The answer completely disarmed her. There was a brutal honesty in those words that contrasted with all the mystery he cultivated around himself. It was as if, for a moment, the masks had fallen, and she was seeing the real man behind the carefully constructed persona. Victor raised his hand and gently touched her face, and Olivia instinctively closed her eyes. His fingers were warm and sure, and there was a disconcerting familiarity to them, as if they already knew exactly how to touch her. Olivia, he whispered her name, and the way he pronounced it made something melt inside her. She opened her eyes and found herself lost in his gaze. It was like standing at the edge of an abyss, knowing that the next step would be a free fall, but feeling strangely safe in the hands of this man she barely knew. "You said you only stop if I tell you to," she whispered. "And I keep my word," he replied, but he didn't remove his hand from her face. "And if I don't want you to stop, then I won't stop." The promise hung in the air between them like a challenge and a liberation. Olivia felt that she was about to cross a line that separated her from the version of herself she had been until that moment. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of what she would find on the other side. When Victor finally kissed her, it was as if the entire world reorganized itself around that moment. It wasn't a desperate or impatient kiss, but something calculatingly slow, a deliberate exploration that made each second stretch until it seemed eternal. Olivia felt her legs weaken, not just from the physical intensity, but from the discovery that she had been thirsty for something she didn't even know existed. He pulled away slightly, studying her reaction, and Olivia realized she was breathing irregularly. "Still, want me to stop?" he asked, and there was something almost cruel in the gentle way he asked the question, as if he knew exactly what the answer would be. "No," she whispered, and the word came out laden with a surrender that both frightened and excited her. Victor smiled, and this time his smile had a predatory quality that made Olivia's stomach flip with anticipation. He gently guided her away from the piano, toward a large sofa that faced the windows. The city blinked below like a field of fallen stars, and Olivia had the surreal sensation of floating above everything she knew. When they sat down, Victor deliberately maintained a distance between them, as if he wanted her to take the initiative for the next move. "Why do you do that?" she asked, confused by her own frustration at the distance he maintained. "Do what?" "Leave me wanting more and then pull away." Victor chuckled softly, a sound that reverberated in Olivia's chest like a caress. "Because you've spent your entire life being protected from your own desires. I want you to discover them gradually, to feel each one with total intensity." There was a perverse wisdom to it that destabilized her. He was right. Her entire life had been a succession of limits imposed from outside, of rules that protected her from feeling too much, wanting too much, risking too much. And now she was faced with someone who not only removed those limits, but forced her to recognize that they existed. "And if I don't know how," she asked, vulnerable, "then I'll teach you," he replied, and there was a dark promise in those words that made something contract inside her. Victor stood up and walked to the sound system, changing the music to something even softer and more hypnotic. When he returned, he brought a different bottle of wine and 2 new glasses. His movements had a ritual quality, as if each gesture were part of a ceremony that she didn't completely understand. "Tell me something you've never told anyone," he said, serving the wine. The request caught her off guard. "Why?" "Because secrets create intimacy, and true intimacy is more intense than any physical contact." Olivia took the glass and took a sip, buying time to think. There were so many secrets in her life, so many unanswered questions that she carried alone. But there was one in particular that she had never dared to speak aloud. "Sometimes I dream about my sister," she said finally. "She died when I was only 2 years old, but in my dreams, she's always trying to tell me something important. I wake up before I can understand what it is, but I have the feeling it's something about the night she died." Victor became motionless, the glass halfway to his mouth. For a moment, something passed through his eyes that Olivia couldn't interpret. It was as if she had just mentioned something he didn't expect to hear. "How did she die?" he asked, and his voice had a different quality now, more controlled. "A car accident. My parents never talked much about the details. It was late at night, it was raining." Olivia paused, realizing she was revealing more than she intended. "Why do you want to know?" "Curiosity," Victor replied, but there was something in the response that didn't convince her. He took a sip of wine and approached her again. "It must be difficult to grow up in the shadow of someone you barely knew." "It's like living with a ghost," Olivia admitted. Sometimes I think my parents see me as a second chance to do things right, as if I could redeem the mistakes she made. And what mistakes were those? The question made Olivia hesitate. It was dangerous territory, full of unconfirmed whispers and significant looks she had caught over the years. I think she got involved with someone inappropriate, someone my parents didn't approve of. I heard fragments of conversations over the years, references to an older man, married. She stopped, realizing how much she was exposing. Victor nodded, slowly, as if that information confirmed something he already knew. And you? Have you ever been involved with someone inappropriate? I've never been involved with anyone, appropriate or not, she confessed, feeling her face heat up. Never? Never. You're the first man who... She stopped, realizing she didn't know how to finish the sentence. Who what? Who makes me feel like I'm on fire inside. The confession hung in the air between them like a provocation. Victor put his glass on the table and turned completely to her, and Olivia felt as if she were about to be devoured by that intense gaze. Olivia, he said, and there was something almost solemn in the way he pronounced her name. Before we go any further, I need you to understand something. Tonight will change you. It's not just about physical pleasure. It's about discovering parts of yourself that you didn't even know existed. Once you cross this line, you can no longer pretend that you're the same innocent person you were when you arrived here. His words had the weight of a warning and the seduction of a promise. Olivia knew he was right, that she had reached a point of no return. But for the first time in her life, the idea of not being able to turn back didn't frighten her. In fact, it liberated her. I understand, she said, and her voice came out firm, carrying a determination that surprised her. Victor smiled, and this time his smile had a predatory quality that made Olivia's stomach flip with anticipation. Hasu, then come here, he said, extending his hand to her. I'll show you what it's like to feel completely alive. When Olivia took his hand, she knew she was about to discover not just the secrets of her own body, but the secrets of a story that went far beyond that night, far beyond what either of them was willing to admit at that moment. The night that followed was an education in sensations that Olivia had never imagined existed. Victor was patient and deliberate, like a teacher teaching a complex lesson that needed to be absorbed slowly. Each touch was calculated to awaken something new inside her. Each kiss mapped unexplored territories of pleasure and vulnerability. It wasn't the desperate and quick experience she had imagined her first time would be, but something more like a slow and intoxicating dance, where she learned the steps as the music played. There were moments when Victor stopped completely, observing her reactions with an intensity that made her feel simultaneously exposed and protected. I only stop if you tell me to, he repeated like a mantra, and each time he said it, Olivia felt her power over the situation grow, even as she completely surrendered to the sensations he awakened in her body. When dawn finally broke, they were lying in his bed, wrapped in white linen sheets that smelled of lavender and something indefinably masculine. Olivia felt different, as if every cell in her body had been reorganized during the night. It wasn't just the loss of virginity that had transformed her, but the discovery of a capacity for pleasure that she had never suspected she possessed. Victor slept beside her, and for the first time, she could observe him without being observed. In return, there was something younger about his face during sleep, a vulnerability he hid when awake. His hands, which had learned her body with a disconcerting precision, rested relaxed on the pillow. Olivia had a strange impulse to touch him, to discover if he would react to her touch with the same intense way she had reacted to his. But something prevented her from doing this. There was an untouchable quality to Victor even during sleep, as if he maintained an emotional distance even in the greatest physical proximity. Throughout the night, even in the moments of greatest intimacy, Olivia had felt that he was simultaneously present and absent, as if a part of him were elsewhere, in another time. She got up silently and walked to the window, wrapping herself in a robe she found hanging on a chair. New York was awakening below, and the morning sun painted the city with golden tones that made everything seem softer and more forgivable. It was hard to believe that just a few hours before, she was a completely different person, someone who had never felt what she felt during that night. No regrets? Victor's voice came from behind her, husky with sleep. Olivia turned and found him propped up on his elbow, observing her with that penetrating gaze that was already becoming familiar. None, she replied, and discovered it was true. Good, he said, getting up and walking to her. Even naked, there was a naturalness to his movements that spoke of someone completely comfortable with his own body. When he embraced her from behind, Olivia allowed herself to relax against his chest, feeling his warmth through the robe. "And now?" she asked. "Now you go back to your life, and I go back to mine," Victor replied. But there was something in his voice that suggested the answer wasn't as simple as it seemed. "Is it always like this?" "Like what?" "One night and then everyone goes their separate ways." Victor was silent for a moment, and Olivia felt a tension form between them. "Usually, yes," he said finally. But you're not usual." The response destabilized her. There was an implication in those words that she didn't know how to interpret. What does that mean? Instead of answering, Victor moved away from her and walked to the piano in the living room. Olivia followed him, intrigued. He opened the lid of the instrument for the first time since she had arrived, revealing the ivory keys that gleamed in the morning light. Without warning, he began to play a melancholic melody that Olivia vaguely recognized but couldn't place in her memory. "Do you know this music?" he asked, without stopping playing. "I think so." "It seems familiar," Olivia replied, approaching the piano. The music was beautiful, but there was something disturbing about it, a ghostly quality that made her heart tighten. "Chopin. Nocturne in E-flat major," Victor said, and his hands moved over the keys with a familiarity that spoke of years of practice. It was one of her favorites. Hers. Victor stopped playing abruptly, as if he had realized he had said something he shouldn't have. The silence that followed was charged with a different tension, denser and more disturbing. "Whose?" Olivia insisted, although something inside her already knew she didn't want to hear the answer. Victor closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them again, there was an expression in them that Olivia had never seen before. It was as if he were internally debating whether or not he should cross a line from which there would be no return. "Someone you remind me of very much," he said finally. "How so?" "The way you tilt your head when you're thinking, the way you smile with your eyes before you smile with your mouth, the way your hands move when you talk." Victor paused, and his voice became lower. "Even the way you say my name." Olivia felt a chill in her stomach. "Victor, you're scaring me." "That wasn't my intention," he said, getting up from the piano and walking to the table where there was a pile of books. He picked up one of them, an old poetry book, and leafed through it, slowly. "But perhaps it's time for you to know the truth." "What truth?" Instead of answering, Victor opened the book to a specific page and handed it to her. It was a copy of Sylvia Plath, and on the marked page there was a handwritten note in the margin. The handwriting was delicate and feminine, and the words were written in blue ink that had faded with time. "Vey, you see me from the inside. That scares me. But don't stop." Olivia read the phrase 3 times before her brain completely processed what she was seeing. The handwriting was too familiar, painfully familiar. It was the same writing she had seen on some old papers kept in her parents' house, the same signature on some birthday cards that had been preserved as relics. "Sarah," she whispered, and the name left her mouth like a broken prayer. Victor nodded slowly, and for the first time since they had met, he seemed vulnerable, almost fragile. "Yes, Sarah." The book slipped from Olivia's hands and fell to the floor with a dull sound that echoed through the room like a gunshot. She felt dizzy, as if the floor were moving beneath her feet. Everything began to make sense in a way that nauseated her. The immediate familiarity she had felt with Victor, the way he had observed her in the gallery, as if he recognized her, the apartment full of objects that seemed to have a secret history. "You knew my sister," she said, and it wasn't a question. The silence that followed was deafening. "Olivia, felt as if the world had stopped spinning, as if even the air had become denser and more difficult to breathe. Victor remained motionless a few feet away from her, observing every micro-expression that crossed her face, waiting for a reaction she couldn't formulate. "I did," he said finally, and the word carried the weight of a confession that had been delayed for too long. "I knew her very well." Olivia instinctively moved away from him, as if physical proximity could contaminate her ability to think clearly. "How? When? Why did you never say anything?" The questions came in bursts, each more desperate than the last. Victor ran his hand through his hair, a gesture that revealed a nervousness he had hidden until that moment. "Sarah and I met 3 years before she died. She was 19 when we first met. The same age that Olivia was now. The coincidence hit her like a punch to the stomach, where, at a charity event very similar to the one where we met, Olivia felt her legs weaken and leaned against the nearest wall. You're telling me that what happened last night was a repetition? That you saw me and thought of my sister?" "No," Victor answered too quickly, and then paused, as if realizing that the denial had sounded desperate. "Not exactly. When I saw you at the gallery, the resemblance hit me like lightning, it's true. But it wasn't just the physical appearance, it was something more subtle, deeper." "What exactly?" "The way you observed the artwork, the way you held your wine glass, the way your eyes moved when you were absorbed in thought." Victor approached her, but stopped when he saw that Olivia retreated even further. Sarah had the same mannerisms, the same elegant melancholy. "Elegant melancholy," Olivia repeated, and there was a bitterness in her voice that she didn't try to hide. "Is that how you describe the women you collect?" "I don't collect women," Victor said, and for the first time since they had met there was real irritation in his voice. "Sarah wasn't an adventure for me, Olivia. She was..." "Was what?" "She was the only person who ever made me question everything about who I thought I was." The brutal honesty of the response disarmed Olivia even more. There was genuine pain in Victor's voice that contrasted with the composure he usually maintained. It was as if the mask had completely fallen, revealing a man who carried his own wounds. "Tell me about her," Olivia said, and surprised herself with her own courage. "Tell me about Sarah and you." Victor walked to the window, turning his back to her. The morning light created an outline around his silhouette, and Olivia realized there was something broken in the way he held his shoulders. "Sarah was pure intensity," he began, his voice lower now. "There was no middle ground with her. When she loved with every fiber of her being. When she suffered as if the world were ending. When she laughed, she illuminated any place where she was." "Did you love each other?" "I loved her," Victor corrected. Sarah loved me in a way that frightened me. It was as if she had opened all the emotional floodgates and let everything overflow onto me. It was overwhelming and beautiful and terrifying at the same time." Olivia felt a pang of something she couldn't immediately identify. It wasn't exactly jealousy, but something close to it, mixed with a morbid curiosity about the sister she never truly knew. "And my parents, did they know about you two?" "Not officially, but Sarah wasn't good at keeping secrets when it came to her feelings. I think they suspected there was someone, but they never knew who." "Why did you break up?" Victor turned to face her, and Olivia saw something break in his eyes. "We didn't break up, she died." "In the car accident." "It wasn't an accident, Olivia." The words fell between them like bombs. Olivia felt the air leave her lungs all at once, as if she had received a blow to the solar plexus. "What do you mean?" "Sarah killed herself. Deliberately. She drove the car into a tree on a deserted road on a rainy night 3 days after our last meeting." Olivia's world collapsed. All the stories she had heard, all the carefully edited versions her parents had told over the years, all the half-truths she had accepted without question, everything crumbled at once. "Why?" she managed to ask, though her voice came out as a strangled whisper. "Because I told her we couldn't continue together," Victor answered, and his words came out like a confession torn by force. "I was afraid of her intensity, of the way she loved me without reservations. I was afraid of losing myself in her completely." So you abandoned her. I protected her from myself, Victor corrected, but there was little conviction in his voice. Or at least that's what I told myself at the time. Sarah deserved someone who could love her without fear, someone who didn't try to control their own capacity to feel. Olivia felt sick. The revelation was like a poison spreading through her veins, contaminating everything that had happened between her and Victor. And then you saw me and thought what? That you could have a second chance, that you could correct the mistakes you made with her? At first, maybe, Victor admitted. But after talking with you, after spending the night with you, I realized that you are completely different people. Are we? Sarah burned like a bonfire. You burn like embers, lower, more constant, but with the same heat. The comparison should have been poetic, but it sounded like a cold, calculated analysis. Olivia felt like a specimen being studied, an interesting variation on a theme that Victor already knew all too well. You brought me here because I remind you of her, she said, and it wasn't a question. I brought you here because you made me feel something I thought I had lost forever when Sarah died, Victor replied. The ability to surprise myself, to want something more than just spending a night with someone. And what do you want with me? I want the chance not to ruin everything again. The answer was honest and vulnerable, but it came too late. Olivia felt as if she had been deceived, manipulated, used as a substitute for a lost love. Worse, still she felt as if she had betrayed her sister's memory by giving herself to the man who had caused her death. I need to leave, she said, heading to the bedroom to get her clothes. Olivia, wait. No, she turned to face him, and there was a determination in her voice that surprised her. Don't ask me to wait. Don't ask me to understand. You've lied to me since the moment we met. I never lied to you. You lied by omission. You let me believe I was special, that something unique was happening between us, when in reality I was just an echo of someone else. Victor tried to approach, but Olivia raised her hand, stopping him. Don't touch me. Not now. When she finished, dressing and headed for the door, Victor said, Olivia, what I felt for you last night was real. What I feel now is real. She stopped at the door but didn't turn around. Maybe it is, but how can I know if you're seeing me or if you're seeing her ghost? The question hung in the air without an answer, and Olivia left the apartment knowing she would carry that doubt forever. The days that followed were a downward spiral of questioning that Olivia couldn't stop. She returned to the apartment she shared with her roommates and locked herself in her room, pretending to have the flu to avoid questions about where she had spent the weekend. But the walls of her small room seemed to echo with fragments of the conversation she had had with Victor, each revelation resurfacing at random moments to disarm her again. Sarah had killed herself. Her sister, whom she had always imagined as a force of nature, had chosen to leave this world for love. Worse still, she had chosen to leave because of the same man who now made Olivia question everything about herself. The irony was too cruel to be coincidence. After a week of insomnia and missed classes, Olivia made a decision she had been putting off for years. She called her parents and said she needed to come home for a few days. She didn't give detailed explanations, just said she was feeling lost and needed time to think. Her mother, always worried, immediately offered to pick her up by car, but Olivia insisted she would take a bus. She needed the hours of travel to organize her thoughts and decide how to approach the subject with them. The house where she grew up seemed smaller than she remembered, as if the years of absence had shrunk the rooms and decreased the distance between the walls. But the atmosphere of silent melancholy remained unchanged. Sarah's room remained untouched, preserved like a museum of interrupted youth, and Olivia felt a tightness in her chest as she passed the slightly open door. Her parents received her, with the excessive care they always showed, avoiding direct questions about what had brought her back, as if they feared that any pressure might break her. During dinner, they talked about safe subjects, classes at the university, colleagues, plans for the holidays, but Olivia felt the weight of unasked questions hovering over the table like familiar ghosts. It was only on the second day, when she found her mother arranging some old photos in the living room, that she decided to break the silence that had defined her family for 2 decades. "Mom," she said, sitting next to her on the couch, "I need to know the truth about Sarah." The reaction was immediate. Her mother stiffened, her hands stopping in the middle of putting away a photograph. "What truth, honey? You know what happened." "I know she died in a car accident, but I don't know why she was driving alone on a deserted road in the middle of the night. I don't know why you never talk about the months before her death. I don't know who was the man she was involved with." The silence that followed was different from the usual silences in the house. It was charged with a tension that Olivia had never felt before, as if she had touched something that her parents had buried so deep they could barely remember where. "Who told you there was a man?" her mother asked, and her voice was strangely controlled. "I heard conversations over the years, fragments, whispers, and I met someone who knew her." "Who?" Olivia hesitated. How could she explain Victor without explaining everything else? How could she tell about the night they spent together, about the way he had touched her, about the devastating discovery that he had been Sarah's last love? "Someone who was present in the last days of her life," she said, choosing her words carefully. "Her?" Mother got up abruptly and walked to the window, turning her back to Olivia. When she spoke again, her voice was weaker, carrying a pain that had been kept silent for too long. "Sarah was lost in the last months before she died," she began. "There was a man, yes, older, with a complicated reputation. We tried to talk to her, tried to make her understand that it wouldn't work out, but she was obsessed." "Obsessed how?" "She talked about him constantly, wrote letters she never sent, spent hours at the piano playing music he had taught her. It was as if she had completely lost herself in the idea of him." Olivia felt a shiver run down her spine. Her mother's description echoed disturbingly with her own feelings of the past few days. "What happened between them?" "We don't know exactly. Sarah didn't tell us the details, but in the last weeks she was different, more quiet, sadder, as if something had broken inside her." Her mother paused, and when she continued, her voice was almost inaudible. "The night she died, she had gone out to meet him. We thought maybe they had argued, that maybe he had ended everything." "And you never knew who he was?" "We knew the name. Victor something. But after the funeral, he disappeared. We never heard from him again." The name echoed in the room like a gunshot. Olivia felt as if the ground had opened beneath her feet. Hearing her mother pronounce Victor's name, officially connecting him to Sarah's tragedy, made everything more real and more devastating. "Why did you never tell me this?" Her mother turned, and Olivia saw tears streaming down her face. "Because we didn't want you to grow up believing that love could destroy someone. Because we wanted you to have the chance to love without fear, without carrying the weight of your sister's tragedy." "But I grew up carrying that weight anyway," Olivia said, and there was a bitterness in her voice that surprised her. "I grew up feeling responsible for being the surviving daughter, for carrying your hopes, for being everything that Sarah couldn't be." "That was never our intention." "Maybe not, but it was the result." Olivia got up and walked toward Sarah's room. For the first time in years, she pushed the door completely open and entered the preserved space. It was like entering a time capsule, where everything had been frozen at the exact moment Sarah had left for her last meeting. The walls were covered with posters of bands from the 2000s, poetry books were scattered on the desk, and clothes still hung in the closet as if their owner would return at any moment. But it was the small piano in the corner of the room that caught her attention. On the piano were handwritten sheet music, and as Olivia approached, she recognized some of the music. Victor had played for her, Chopin mainly, but also some compositions that seemed to be Sarah's original creations. The margins of the sheet music were full of annotations in her delicate handwriting, comments on interpretation and feeling that revealed a deep intimacy with the music. On one of the scores, she found an annotation that made her heart stop. "For V, who taught me that music can break hearts and heal them at the same time." Olivia sat on the piano bench and rested her head in her hands. She was beginning to understand the extent of the tragedy that had happened in that room 20 years ago. Sarah hadn't just fallen in love with Victor. She had completely lost herself in him, had built her entire identity around that impossible love. And now she herself was running the risk of repeating the same story, of losing herself in the same man who had destroyed her sister. The irony was too cruel to be accidental. Victor had said she was different from Sarah, but perhaps he was wrong. Perhaps the sisters were more alike than anyone imagined. The question that tormented her now was simple and impossible at the same time. How to love someone who had caused the death of the person he should have protected, and how to know if her feelings were real or just echoes of a tragedy that refused to stay in the past. Olivia spent 3 entire days in Sarah's room, excavating the vestiges of the life her sister had built and then destroyed. She found diaries hidden among the books, love letters never sent, photographs that had never been revealed to the family. It was as if she were assembling a giant puzzle where each piece revealed a new facet of the tragedy. The diaries were particularly revealing. Sarah wrote with an intensity that jumped off the pages, describing her encounters with Victor in details that made Olivia feel simultaneously voyeur and victim. "He sees me as no one has ever seen me," Sarah had written in an entry dated just a week before she died. "It's as if he could read my soul through my eyes, but sometimes I'm afraid that he sees too much, that I'm too transparent for him." The last entry in the diary was unfinished, the words cut off in the middle of a sentence, as if Sarah had been interrupted by something urgent. "Victor said we need to talk. There's something in his voice that scares me, as if he's already made a decision about us, but I can't let him go, I can't. He doesn't understand that without him I am just—" The sentence ended there, but Olivia could easily fill in the blank. Without him, Sarah felt empty, incomplete, without purpose. It was exactly the same sensation that Olivia had been experiencing since she left Victor's apartment. As if an essential part of herself had been left behind, trapped in that place between the glass walls and the whispered secrets. In one of the letters never sent, Sarah had written something that made Olivia stop breathing for a moment. "My dear little sister, if you're ever reading this, I hope you're braver than I was. I hope you find someone who loves you without fear, someone who isn't afraid of their own intensity. Because I'm beginning to understand that V loves me, but is afraid to love me, and that fear will destroy us." It was as if Sarah had predicted not only her own tragedy, but also the possibility that Olivia would one day find herself in a similar situation. The letter continued, "There are moments when I look in the mirror and see you live. I see how you would be at 19, and I wonder if you would inherit the same capacity to love without limits that defines and condemns me. I hope so and I hope not, because it is a gift and a curse at the same time." Olivia carefully folded the letter and kept it with the pendant she wore around her neck. It was as if Sarah were speaking directly to her across time, offering a warning and a blessing at the same time. On the 4th day, she found something that completely changed her perspective on the entire situation. Hidden at the bottom of a drawer, among old sheet music, was a sealed envelope with her own name written in Sarah's handwriting. The paper had yellowed with time, and the wax seal had broken slightly at the edges, but the contents remained intact. With trembling hands, Olivia opened the envelope and removed 2 sheets of paper, covered with her sister's delicate handwriting. The letter was dated 3 days before Sarah's death. "My dear Olivia," the letter began, "if you're reading this, it means something has happened to me and that you've grown up enough to understand certain truths about our family. There are things I need to tell you, things I never had the courage to say in life." Olivia sat on Sarah's bed and continued reading, feeling as if her sister were there in the room with her, whispering secrets that had been kept for too long. "First, I want you to know that your existence saved me in many ways. When you were born, I was a troubled child, rebellious, who caused more worry than joy for our parents. But seeing you grow so sweet and careful made me want to be a better person. You were my first lesson in unconditional love. Second, I want you to tell you about V. I know our parents will try to hide this part of my story, but you deserve to know the truth. V is not a villain as they will want you to believe. He is a complicated man, haunted by his own wounds, who loved me in the only way he knew how to love, with caution and fear. Olivia felt tears running down her face. It was surreal to read her sister's words defending the same man who had become the center of her own emotional turmoil. "What is about to happen between us is not his fault," the letter continued. "It is the result of my own inability to accept that sometimes love is not enough to overcome the fundamental differences between two people. V needs control, and I need total freedom. He is afraid of intensity, and I don't know how to live without it. But there is something about V that you need to understand in case your paths ever cross. Beneath all that protection, all those walls he builds around his heart, there is a man capable of loving with a depth that can heal or destroy." Sarah had paused in the letter, and when she resumed, her handwriting was slightly different, as if she had cried while writing. "If you ever meet him, if by some twist of fate you get to know each other, remember that you are not me. You have a strength I never had, a capacity to preserve yourself that I never developed. Perhaps you can love him without losing yourself in him. Perhaps you can be what I never could be for him, someone who loves him without fear." The letter ended with a line that made Olivia sob. "Take care of your heart, little sister, but don't protect it so much that it forgets how to beat." Olivia sat in Sarah's room for hours, rereading the letter and processing its implications. It was as if her sister had predicted exactly what would happen, as if she had known that Victor and Olivia would meet one day. More than that, it was as if Sarah were giving her blessing for Olivia to do what she herself had not been able to do, love Victor without destroying herself in the process. When she finally went downstairs to have dinner with her parents, Olivia had a clarity she hadn't had in days. She knew she needed to return to New York. She knew she needed to confront Victor again. But this time, it would be different. This time, she wouldn't just be an echo of Sarah, but Olivia with her own strength, her own choices, her own capacity to love. "Mom, Dad," she said during dessert, "I need to go back to New York tomorrow." "But you just got here," her mother protested. "I know, but I found what I came here looking for." "And what was that?" Olivia smiled, and it was the first genuine smile she had given in days. "Sarah's permission to live my own story." Her parents exchanged confused looks but didn't ask more questions. They had learned over the years that sometimes it was better to trust in their daughter's wisdom, even when they couldn't completely understand it. That night, Olivia carefully packed Sarah's letter, along with some of the handwritten sheet. Music. They were gifts from her sister, instruments that would help her navigate the dangerous and beautiful territory of true love. When the bus departed the next morning, she carried in her heart a determination that was her own, but also an echo of Sarah's last words, "Don't protect your heart so much that it forgets how to beat." Olivia returned to New York with a determination that surprised even herself. The bus trip had been a period of mental preparation, where she mentally rehearsed the conversation she needed to have with Victor. It wouldn't be a desperate surrender or a resentful confrontation, but something different. A mature woman offering a man haunted by the past the chance to build a different future. But when she arrived at the apartment she shared with her roommates, she found a surprise that momentarily destabilized her. There was a package waiting for her without a sender, wrapped in simple craft paper. Inside was a new copy of the same Sylvia Plath book she had seen in Victor's apartment, along with a single fresh red flower and a card that said only, "Thank you for reminding me that some stories deserve a different ending." Olivia held the flower against her chest and knew that Victor had gone through the same questioning she had during her absence. Somehow, he too had come to the conclusion that the past didn't need to define the future, that Sarah and Olivia were two different women, living different times in their lives. Instead of immediately running to his apartment, Olivia decided to do something that Sarah had never done: take control of the situation. She picked up the phone and called the number he had given her on the first night, but which she had never used. "Victor," she said when he answered, and there was a firmness in her voice that surprised her. "Olivia." He said her name like a prayer of relief. "You're back. I'm back, and I need to talk to you." "When? Where?" Now, but not at your apartment, in a neutral place. There's a cafe on Broadway near the Union Square subway. Do you know it? I know it. I'll be there in an hour. Victor, she said before he hung up. Yes? This time, I'm the one who sets the rules. The silence that followed was charged with surprise and something that could have been admiration. Understood, he said finally. Olivia arrived at the cafe 15 minutes before the scheduled time and chose a corner table from where she could observe the entrance. When Victor arrived, she saw him before he located her and had a moment to study the man who had become so central to her life in such a short time. He looked different, less controlled, as if the days of separation had shaken the carefully constructed composure she had known. When he finally saw her, his eyes lit up in a way that made Olivia's heart race, but she forced herself to remain seated, to maintain control of the situation she had promised herself. You're different, he said when he sat down, and there was a mixture of admiration and caution in his voice. I am, Olivia confirmed. I discovered some things about myself and about Sarah. What did you discover? Instead of answering immediately, Olivia took the letter Sarah had left for her from her bag and placed it on the table. My sister left me a letter about you. Victor looked at the paper as if it were a dangerous snake. What did she say? That you weren't the villain of the story. That you loved her in the only way you knew how to love, and that maybe I was strong enough to do what she couldn't. And what was that? Love you without losing myself in the process. The words hung between them like a bridge that either of them could choose to cross or destroy. Victor studied Olivia's face for a long moment, as if looking for signs that she had reached the same conclusion as he had. Olivia, he said finally, I've spent the last few days thinking about everything that happened between us, about everything I said, about all the ways I failed to be honest with you from the beginning. And what conclusion did you reach? That you were right when you said I was seeing Sarah's ghost instead of seeing you, but you were also wrong. How so? I was seeing Sarah at first, it's true, but after our first conversation, after spending that night with you, I realized that you are fundamentally different people. Sarah was a fire that consumed everything around her. You are water that can extinguish or feed the fire, depending on how it's directed. The analogy was better than anything he had said before, more precise and less condescending. And what do you want from me, Victor, really this time? I want the chance to start over, without lies by omission, without the ghosts of the past dictating the present. I want to get to know you as Olivia, not as Sarah's sister. And are you willing to let me set the pace this time? To let me decide when and how things happen between us? Victor smiled, and it was a different smile from all those she had seen before. It was younger, less calculated, more genuine. Yes, completely. Olivia leaned forward, approaching him for the first time since they had sat down. Then here are my conditions. No psychological games, no tests to see how far I'll go, no treating me as if I were too fragile to handle your complexities. And what do you want in return? Total honesty, transparency about your feelings, your fears, your regrets, and patience while I discover who I am when I'm with you. It's a fair deal. There's one more thing, Olivia said, and her voice became more serious. I want you to tell me about Sarah. Everything. The good parts, the bad, what it was like to love her, what it was like to lose her. Because she is part of our story, whether we want it or not. And I prefer to know the complete truth than to spend the rest of my life imagining. Victor nodded slowly. That will be difficult for me. I know. But it's necessary. They were silent for a moment, each processing the implications of the agreement they were making. It was more mature than anything Sarah and Victor had managed to build, more balanced, based on conscious choices instead of blind passion. There's something else you need to know, Victor said finally. In the last few days since you left my apartment, I understood something about myself that I had never admitted before. What? That I sabotaged myself with Sarah because I was afraid she loved me more than I deserved, and that I was about to do the same thing with you. The confession was vulnerable and honest, exactly the kind of emotional transparency that Olivia had asked for. And now? Now, I'm willing to work to deserve what you're offering. Olivia extended her hand across the table, and when Victor took it, she felt the same electric current as the first time, but now accompanied by something different, a sense of security, of conscious choice, of two adults deciding to build something together. Then let's try, she said, but this time we do it our way. Our way, he agreed. When they left the cafe together, walking through the busy streets of New York, Olivia felt that she was finally living her own story. Not the shadow of Sarah's tragedy, not a repetition of the past, but something new and her own. Victor walked beside her, respecting the space she had created between them, but there was a palpable connection that promised future intensities, explored at the right time, in the right way. That night, when they finally kissed again, in her apartment on her terms at the moment chosen by her, Olivia knew that Sarah had been right. She was strong enough to love without losing herself. She was brave enough to choose love even when it came with complications. And she was wise enough to honor the past without letting it define her future. The love they built from that day on was different from anything either of them had known before, slower, more conscious, more real. And when, months later, Victor was finally able to talk about Sarah without pain, and Olivia was able to listen without jealousy, both knew they had created something truly their own.